the good bit, our next segment, is actually about somebody who runs a business that's been a beneficiary of EIS. So, Cliff Kirby, very good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
What's your company? What do you do? What's the problem you're solving? And how did EIS work for you?
So if I'll talk to you, I'm the chief executive of a company called NeedleSmart.
Yeah.
Our primary focus is destroying hypodermic needles at the point of use. The root cause of that starts from as an injection goes through, there is then a need to dispose of the needle and then dispose of the needle beyond that through a waste stream.
Yeah. So typically today, that's where you, if you're in a hospital, there's just literally a bucket, isn't there? And it sort of has been just dropped in there. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And my background is in mechanical design, and I think when you start looking at these problems and you think there must be a better way to do it,
yeah,
and you're absolutely to the point, is that as you dispose of a needle, it goes straight to a point in where it's incinerated somewhere downstream of that.
Yeah. And again, a fact I didn't really know until I did a quick bit of research on your website earlier today, is that there are a number of injuries that come out of this whole process of kind of using a needle, which I must admit I wouldn't have imagined. And it's all of these numbers, they're significant, aren't they? The sort of number of needles sort of used, disposed of annually is an extraordinary amount of number of injuries, etc., etc. So this is a global problem.
Oh, absolutely. I think within the UK, we're actually very good in terms of how the risk is managed and how the problem is dealt with. Globally, the problem increases significantly. The needle stick injury, which I think is what you're referring to, is it happens in the workplace. There was a point not too long ago, and it may well still be the case, it was the second most common injury, work-related injury in the NHS. That may have slipped down the table now, but it certainly was the case for some time.
So as you say, you're an engineer by sort of background. You came across this problem. How did you use the whole EIS process as a sort of funding mechanism?
Well, my background was I am a mechanical design engineer by profession, and through a series of promotions, good fortune, or however you want to describe it.
Let's call it talent.
Okay, we'll call it talent. I was launching products for large companies across a portfolio style approach, and what that teaches you is that you understand the budget requirements for each and every department that you work with. And then with NeedleSmart, I had an opportunity, an amazing idea and a great concept and a patent. And then we think, well, actually, how do we make best use of that? And the idea of getting from A to B on a funding mechanism, then having to stop, refocus, then refinance again, in my mind is one of the main reasons why startup companies really struggle to get some traction into the marketplace. So in order to be able to deliver that kind of funding mechanism where you want to have the total effect, so what you need on day one and on the day where you launch the product and everything in between the two. And I accept that I'm probably in quite a small percentage who've been there and done it for other people, is you need a mechanism that works. Now for us that mechanism was EIS, and it works very, very well because some of the offset risk can be offset. But equally, people are genuinely investing in a high-risk opportunity. So we put together a funding mechanism or a funding requirement that took the product from start to finish in a given period of time. And we stand by that time period, and we are, to a larger extent, living by that. We've delivered the first product to market now. But I think, in answer to your question, had we taken a very straightforward funding model and tried to, I call it the roller coaster of funding and innovation, where we had enough to get up to the top of the roller coaster, then we drop off and we spend that money and we start again, I doubt that we'd be through proof of concept at this point.
And I guess in that roller coaster style of trying to raise money, you actually stop for 3 or 4 months as you go run around and try and find a bit more money, and then you can almost restart the business, don't you? Whereas EIS gives you a sort of slightly more, a slightly smoother journey and a more continuous journey.
I take it that there's a number of points, but one of the that you're addressing there is absolutely right. Is you get to a point, I think honestly 3 to 4 months is optimistic. In many cases it's more like 6 to 9, but then things are happening before then that aren't necessarily visible to an investor or existing investors. So the development team may be 10 people strong. As money starts to run out, you're either losing staff or you're taking people onto part-time hours. Those people on part-time hours, by virtue of needing a salary, are going to go elsewhere. You're losing talent, you're losing knowledge, you're losing experience. And that happens before you run out of capital. Then you can go into that period where it could take 3 to 4 months, as mentioned, optimistic in my view. Let's call it 6 to 9. By the time the cash actually rolls back, or the capital into the company, it's another 8 to 10 weeks to actually spool the project back up, get the right people back engaged, and actually start delivering development back to the market that you're trying to serve. So all told, you could easily be sat there going, well, actually, we're a year down the line and physically our development has not moved on. And in this competitive space, standing still for that amount of time, you may well have the best piece of IP, you may well have the best product in principle.
Yeah.
If someone's well capitalised and get to the start line first and start gathering some market share, a brand name in the market can be just as important.
And in the company's sort of journey so far, what are the kind of milestones you point to in terms of success? I mean, I guess number of employees, sort of getting the patent on the core product is one. Where are the sort of future milestones coming, do you think?
Yeah, so on day one we were a product that destroyed a hypodermic needle, and that was the first patent and indeed the second. But as we've moved forward, each one of our products it's a mini computer in its own right. We own the chip, we own the algorithm, and with that comes the ability to harness some data capture capability, so we can define where it was used, how it was used, the frequency by which it was used. That generates supply chain data, so you can automatically reorder. Internationally, we're talking about linking that directly to a patient, so that you can then put a cycle together of saying, well, actually, a vaccination program, we know that patient A has had this vaccination administered by this needle at this time in this location. So you get that kind of eco-cycle of information with the supply chain information pushed out the back end. In terms of the question you asked, well, the first products hit the market now. We've got a number of units going out into NHS Trust now for feasibility. We've done so well internationally. The marketplace is really keen for what we have to offer. The UK as a whole, we're really quite small in terms of geography. As you look at the wider countries, the Indias, the Chinas of this world, they have some really challenging geographic issues to overcome. The ability to manage a level of reorder or telemedicine via the NeedleSmart unit while destroying the hypodermic, which is obviously a potential point of risk, is really quite appealing. So we're doing really well with conversations in the States. Just started with China, doing extremely well in the Middle East and and India.
And do you describe yourselves as a med tech firm, or what? How is the description?
I would say now we are 100% med tech as a business. As I say, in the early days, it was about how do we make the engineering process as good as possible to destroy this sharp object. As we've moved forward, more and more of the marketplace sees that as just part of the process. And more of how we develop is around the user interface, the experience, and what data. There's so much talk about gathering big data, but it's actually gathering data that means something. And that's what we're trying to work with partners on now is, okay, well, we can gather all of this for you, but what actually is going to add some value back to you?
And you at that point at all where you think about exits, whether it's in 1, 2, 3 years, or are you just still very focused on growing the business?
As you might imagine, I get asked this question quite a lot.
Yes.
Is that the business is obviously, with the business product that we have, the suite of service that we offer, it is unlikely to think that people aren't going to be looking at us in the short to medium term. But the business runs as an operational company. I think in my role as chief exec, it would be remiss of me to say I'm going to target an exit for you guys on such and such a date, and if that date comes and goes and we run out of capital, then the only people we can blame is the team, and who's in charge of that team is me. So we treat ourselves as an operational company. We do think that there will come that point where someone will approach us, and there are a number of very interesting propositions on the horizon that we're doing with the technology that I think will just start to add more and more value to that conversation. But the answer is we do treat ourselves as an operational company at this point in time.
And it feels just generally the what you might call the wider life sciences sort of space. MedTech's used a lot. I've just used it, obviously. It looks like a very exciting space that perhaps the advisor community watching the program should really potentially look at for their clients who kind of want maybe a high growth opportunity. Well,
certainly the digital health era has changed the way a lot of people look at that space anyway. Certainly within the UK, it's been widely publicised that this is one of the best hopes for the NHS. And I think that there are a lot of problems there that can be solved with innovation and the right process. Historically, certainly what I saw in first hand was that when you work within the engineering kind of manufacturing environment, there are some very clear rules of engagement as to how you launch a project, how that project has to return on investment, and what is expected back to the business from that project. When you then step into the world of the medical world, it's the patient comes first. So the people on that coalface, the medical coalface, they're not looking at how we can save money or how we can introduce innovation. What they're looking at is how do we get the best outcomes for the patients. And to me, what that creates is a very obvious need and want for people who can innovate and generate solutions back to them, to solve them some problems, and hopefully add some value in the process.
Super. Cliff, we've run out of time, I'm afraid, so thank you very much for coming in.
No problem at all.
Great luck with the business. It sounds like you're way down the path of success already. I'm sure you tell me you've got a long way to go, but it sounds a brilliant business, so thank you for coming in.
No, thank you for having me.